Have you ever found yourself standing at a crossroads, facing emotions so complex and overwhelming that they defy logic and challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself? What would you do if the person you've known your whole life suddenly became the epicenter of a storm you never saw coming? This is not just a story about love and longing. It's about boundaries, choices, and the resilience of the human heart. In today's video, we dive into an unforgettable narrative of discovery, guilt, and redemption. A story that will take you on a roller coaster of emotions, from shock to heartbreak, and finally, to hope. We'll explore the intricate dynamics of relationships, the unexpected ways life tests our limits, and the lessons we can draw from even the most turbulent experiences. Stay with us until the end to uncover how this incredible journey unfolded and what it reveals about the power of healing, forgiveness, and the choices we make to preserve what matters most. This is not just a story, it's a reflection of the struggles and triumphs we all face in our own lives. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I encourage you to click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on today's topic. If you enjoy the content, please comment 1 below. If it doesn't resonate with you, leave a 0. Your feedback is crucial as it helps me create better videos that align with your interests. Now, let's get started. For years, he was a constant in my life, a comforting presence through family gatherings, joyous celebrations, and the quiet, seemingly insignificant moments that made up our days. I had never seen him as anything other than the curious boy I had watched grow up, his endless questions and boundless energy painting a picture of someone destined for greatness. To me, he was Andres, a boy full of dreams and potential, tethered to a future I had always envisioned but never truly questioned. Yet life has a way of shifting the ground beneath your feet when you least expect it, and something changed, something seismic, something that unraveled everything we had been and everything I thought we ever could be. We lived in a modest house perched on the outskirts of a sleepy town, surrounded by a sea of emerald trees that whispered secrets to the wind. It was a haven of peace, a cocoon of tranquility where life was supposed to be simple, predictable. But the simplicity of our surroundings belied the complexity of what was stirring within those walls. Beneath the mundane rhythm of everyday life, a story was quietly taking shape, one that would defy every rule, every convention, and every unspoken boundary of what was considered right. The shift began when Andres returned home from university for his vacation. He stepped through the door with an air that was both familiar and foreign. At first glance, it was still him, the same boy I thought I knew, but something intangible had shifted. There was a new confidence in the way he moved, a quiet authority in his words, and a maturity that hadn't been there before. It was unsettling in its subtlety, like a melody slightly off-key but no less compelling. I remember that day vividly, every detail etched into my mind like a photograph I couldn't put away. Andres sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by scattered notes and textbooks, the sun casting a warm glow over his face. I was busy with the endless chores that filled my afternoons, my hands submerged in soapy water as I scrubbed dishes. At first, I barely registered his presence. He was just there, as he always was. But then I felt it, his gaze. It wasn't the casual glance of the boy I had raised. It was something deeper, more intense, and it pinned me in place. I froze, my hands dripping with suds, my heart pounding in a way that was both unfamiliar and alarming. It was as though his eyes had found a part of me I had kept hidden, even from myself. My chest tightened with emotions I couldn't name, discomfort, intrigue, fear, and something else I was too terrified to acknowledge. "How have you been?" I asked, my voice betraying a shaky attempt at normalcy. But inside, I was unraveling. The ease I had always felt around him was gone, replaced by a shadowy unease that crept through me, whispering of things I dared not think. His answer came slowly, the single word, "Fine," carrying a weight that hung between us like a secret waiting to be spoken. The cadence of his voice was different, measured, deliberate, as though he were testing the waters of a deeper truth. There was a pause, long and deliberate, stretching the air between us until it felt like a barrier I couldn't cross. "There's something I've been thinking about a lot," he finally said, his words slicing through the silence like a blade. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him, intense, searching, filled with a complexity that made my stomach tighten. The atmosphere between us shifted, becoming charged, almost electric. I couldn't ignore the knot forming deep within me, a tangle of emotions I couldn't decipher. I saw it then, in the way he looked at me, a glimmer of something unspoken yet undeniable. It wasn't the gaze of a boy anymore. It was the look of a man grappling with something far greater than words could convey. That look stirred something in me, something raw, something forbidden, something I didn't want to name. My heart raced as the unthinkable loomed between us, threatening to reshape the contours of our relationship forever. In that moment, the world we had known began to fracture. I wanted to retreat, to rewind time to a place where everything was simple, where I could still look at him and see only the child I had nurtured. But I couldn't. The air between us was too heavy, the emotions too thick. Whatever he was about to say, I knew it would change everything, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the storm it would bring. "What is it, Andres?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, though I tried to mask it with the maternal warmth I had always used with him. That tone, steady and comforting, had been my anchor for years, the same tone that had once soothed him when he scraped his knees or had bad dreams. But this time, something was different. Beneath the surface of my voice, an unfamiliar tension quivered, like a string pulled taut and ready to snap. The warmth I tried to project felt hollow, and between us, an invisible barrier seemed to rise, separating us in a way that felt both foreign and inevitable. Andres didn't respond immediately. Instead, his eyes found mine, and what I saw there took my breath away. His gaze was a tempest, swirling with emotions I couldn't fully grasp. Fear, vulnerability, hesitation, and, lurking beneath it all, an intensity that sent a chill through me. It was the kind of look I had never expected to see directed at me, not from him, not from anyone. It was raw and unguarded, a window into a part of him I had never been allowed to see. I didn't know whether to look away or keep staring, caught between the desire to protect him and the instinct to protect myself. In that moment, I was flooded with memories. I saw him as the little boy who used to run to me after every nightmare, his small frame trembling with fear as he sought the comfort only a mother's arms could provide. I remembered his wide eyes filled with wonder when he asked endless questions about the world, his laughter echoing through the house like sunlight made sound. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't the fear of a child or the curiosity of youth. This was the weight of a man struggling with something far more profound, something that terrified him as much as it terrified me. The silence between us stretched endlessly, the kind of silence that feels heavy and alive, pulsing with unspoken words. It wrapped around us like a fog, thick and suffocating, making the air harder to breathe. I could see the struggle in his expression, the way his jaw tightened as if he were holding back a flood he could no longer control. The tension was palpable, a living thing pressing down on us, daring either of us to break it. Finally, his voice emerged, raw and unsteady. "I can't stop thinking about you, Mom," he said, the words tumbling out as though they had been clawing at his throat, desperate to escape. His voice cracked under the weight of his confession, and I felt it like a physical blow. The words hung in the air, sharp and jagged, tearing through the fragile fabric of the reality I thought I knew. My heart froze, then began to race, pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. It was as if the world had stopped spinning, and I was suspended in a moment that defied comprehension. His words echoed in my mind, relentless and haunting. What was he saying? What did he mean? The questions screamed inside me, but no answer came. Or rather, I knew the answer. I had known it the moment the words left his mouth, but I couldn't bear to face it. The truth was too stark, too devastating to confront. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something, anything that might bring us back to the safety of the relationship we had always known. But the words wouldn't come. My voice, my ever-reliable voice, the one that had guided him through so many storms, failed me now. I stood there, paralyzed, caught in a whirlwind of emotions: confusion, disbelief, panic, and something else I didn't want to name. Something dark and forbidden that made my stomach twist and my skin prickle. Andres, however, seemed to find a strange resolve in the wake of his confession. He stood up from his chair, his movements deliberate but charged with a restless energy that set my nerves on edge. His eyes never left mine, dark and intense, holding me captive in a way that made it impossible to look away. I wanted to move, to take a step back and create some distance, but my body betrayed me, rooted to the spot as if I were caught in a spell I couldn't break. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. He approached slowly, the space between us shrinking with every step. The air felt electric, crackling with a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat reverberating through me like a warning I couldn't heed. I wanted to say something, to stop whatever was about to happen, but the words refused to come. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, each one more chaotic than the last. Fear, confusion, and denial battled with a curiosity I couldn't explain, a spark of something primal and dangerous that I didn't want to acknowledge. Before I could react, Andres leaned in and kissed me. It was quick, almost clumsy, his lips brushing against mine in a way that felt both hesitant and determined. But despite its brevity, the kiss carried an emotional weight that left me breathless. It wasn't just a kiss, it was an eruption, a culmination of emotions he had been holding back for God knows how long. And in that instant, everything changed. Shock coursed through me, freezing me in place. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to push him back, to restore the boundaries that had just been obliterated. But my body refused to move. Instead, I stood there, motionless, caught in a moment that felt both endless and fleeting. A spark ignited deep within me, a spark that I tried desperately to extinguish even as it spread like wildfire. For a brief, horrifying instant, I felt something I couldn't explain, something I didn't want to explain. Desire? No, it couldn't be. It wasn't possible. And yet, the intensity of the moment left me questioning everything I thought I knew about myself, about him, about the bond we shared. When the kiss ended, the world came crashing back around me, heavy and suffocating. Andres stepped back, his eyes searching mine for a response, for some kind of acknowledgement of what had just happened. But I couldn't give him one. My mind was a tangled mess of emotions and thoughts, each one pulling me in a different direction. I wanted to scream, to cry, to pretend this moment had never happened. But most of all, I wanted to understand how we had gotten here and where we could possibly go from this. The silence that followed was unbearable, thick with everything we weren't saying. I wanted to run, to escape the weight of his gaze and the truth it held. But deep down, I knew there was no running from this. What had been set into motion couldn't be undone. And as I stood there, caught between the person I had always been and the person I was becoming, I realized with a sinking heart that nothing would ever be the same again. The kiss, though brief, lingered far beyond its fleeting moment, leaving a searing imprint on my lips and an unshakable weight in my heart. It was as if that single act had rewritten the fabric of my reality, unraveling the certainty I thought I held. I could still feel it, the warmth of his lips, the silent intensity of his touch, and I hated myself for not pulling away sooner. Yet, I couldn't deny the electric current that had passed between us, an unspoken connection that seemed to have always been there, dormant, waiting for a spark to bring it to life. My mind spiraled into chaos, a storm of confusion and revelation battling for dominance, threatening to consume me entirely. The weeks that followed were a blur, a whirlwind of suppressed emotions and unanswered questions. The kiss became an unspoken presence, lingering between us like a ghost. Neither of us dared to name it, as if uttering the words would give it power, would solidify it into something we couldn't undo. The tension grew unbearable, filling every interaction with a weight that neither of us knew how to carry. Andres and I avoided talking about what had happened, yet the memory of it was inescapable. It clung to the edges of our conversations, to the way our eyes met and quickly darted away, to the silence that stretched endlessly between us. Every glance he gave me was a reminder, a flicker of acknowledgement that sent my heart racing in ways I didn't want to admit. It was a silent, dangerous dance, a push and pull between the unspoken desire simmering beneath the surface and the undeniable truth of what we could never allow ourselves to want. Each time our eyes locked, it felt like stepping closer to the edge of a cliff, knowing full well the fall would destroy us both. One afternoon, the fragile balance we had been clinging to shattered. We were sitting in the living room, the quiet between us thick with unspoken words. The tension was suffocating, a palpable weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Finally, Andres broke the silence, his voice trembling as he spoke. "I can't stop thinking about what happened," he confessed, his words breaking the dam that had held back the tide of his emotions. His eyes searched mine, desperate for understanding, for anything that might make sense of the chaos we were both feeling. "I don't know what's happening to me, but I know I can't keep ignoring it." His words hit me like a tidal wave, crashing over me with relentless force. The room seemed to tilt, the ground beneath me shifting as if the world itself were responding to the enormity of his confession. I couldn't keep ignoring it either. The truth was, a part of me didn't want to. There was something alive in his words, something raw and undeniable that stirred something equally raw in me. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to experience in years. Vibrant, terrifying, intoxicating. But even as that hidden part of me awakened, guilt surged to the forefront, crushing me under its weight. This couldn't continue. It wasn't just wrong, it was unimaginable. It threatened everything, our relationship, our family, the very foundation of who we were. I forced myself to speak, though my voice felt brittle and foreign in my own ears. "This can't go on," I said, each word dragging across my chest like a blade. I wanted to sound firm, decisive, but my resolve wavered under the weight of my emotions. Inside, I was a maelstrom of conflict, torn between the undeniable pull I felt toward him and the knowledge that this could never be. Andres didn't respond immediately. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, a mix of pain, longing, and resignation. From that moment on, our interactions became a precarious balancing act, a constant push and pull between desire and restraint. I tried to build walls between us, to create a distance that would protect us both. But every time I saw him, those walls crumbled. It wasn't just his words or the intensity of his gaze. It was the way he made me feel alive, the way he saw me in a way I hadn't been seen in years. Even as I hated myself for it, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, visceral, as if he had awakened something in me I had buried long ago. The struggle to resist him was constant, relentless, and exhausting. Every glance, every brush of his hand, every word he spoke seemed to chip away at my defenses, leaving me raw and exposed. One evening, the tension between us reached its breaking point. We were sitting on the couch, ostensibly watching a movie, but neither of us was paying attention. The air between us was charged, every movement and every breath magnified by the silence. I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his gaze burning into my skin, and I knew what he was thinking because I was thinking it too. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened, and I felt as though I were on the verge of shattering. "What are we doing?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The question wasn't just for him. It was for me, for the universe, for whatever force had brought us to this impossible moment. My words hung in the air, trembling with fear and uncertainty, a fragile thread stretched to its limit. "I don't know, Mom," Andres replied, his voice filled with a heartbreaking sincerity that cut through me like a knife. "But I don't want to stop." His words sent a shockwave through me, leaving me breathless. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to beg him to stop saying things that made it harder for me to resist what I already knew I couldn't have. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was sit there, caught in the grip of a battle between my mind and my heart, between who I was and who I was becoming. Deep down, I knew this was wrong. On every conceivable level, this was wrong. And yet, there was a part of me, a part one couldn't ignore, that didn't want to stop either. That part of me craved something I hadn't felt in what felt like a lifetime, a sense of being wanted, of being truly seen. And as much as I hated myself for it, that part of me refused to let go. The days that followed were a living torment. I threw myself into anything and everything to escape the relentless chaos within me. Cleaning, errands, paperwork, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind distracted. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the storm that Andres had unleashed. It wasn't just the kiss, though that memory haunted me like a specter, surfacing in the quietest moments. It was him, his vitality, his raw, unfiltered emotions. He had awakened something in me, something I had buried so deeply that I had forgotten it even existed. The yearning to feel alive, to be desired, to matter in a way that transcended the mundane rhythms of life. Every time our paths crossed in the house, it felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm. A casual brush of his arm against mine sent a jolt through my body, leaving me breathless and ashamed. The accidental meeting of our eyes burned with an intensity one couldn't bear, as if the air between us crackled with unspoken words and forbidden longings. My resolve, fragile to begin with, crumbled a little more each day. I hated myself for it, for the way my heart raced at his presence, for the way I began to dread and crave those fleeting moments when we were alone together. How could I, his mother, be feeling these things? What kind of monster had I become? One night, unable to withstand the weight of my own turmoil, I found myself standing outside his room. My heart pounded in my chest, the pulse echoing in my ears as I raised my hand to knock. I told myself this was necessary, that I needed to confront him, to make him understand that what had happened was a mistake, a terrible, irreparable mistake that could never happen again. But as I opened the door, the speech I had rehearsed in my mind crumbled, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. Andres looked up from his desk, startled by my sudden appearance. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I saw everything reflected back at me, the guilt, the confusion, the anguish, and the desire. It mirrored my own feelings so perfectly that it took my breath away. My resolve faltered, but I forced myself to speak. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of the unspoken. "About us," he said softly, finishing my thought. His voice was steady, but the words struck me like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room. "I can't pretend this isn't happening. I can't act like I don't feel what I feel. Andres," I started, my voice breaking as I grasped for words. "You're my son. This is wrong. We can't." "I know it's wrong," he interrupted, standing and taking a step toward me. His movements were deliberate, his presence overwhelming. "But it doesn't change how I feel. I've tried to fight it. I've tried to ignore it. But it's there, Mom. It's real, and it's not going away." I took a step back, my chest tightening as he closed the distance between us. His voice cracked as he spoke again, each word a plea, raw and unfiltered. "I love you, Mom. Not just as my mother, but as the woman who has always been there for me, who has cared for me, who I admire more than anyone else in the world." His confession shattered me. Tears blurred my vision as I shook my head, trying to reject not just his words but the part of me that wanted so desperately to believe them. "This isn't love, Andres. It's something else, something we need to stop before it destroys us." But even as I said the words, they felt hollow, as if I were trying to convince myself as much as him. My heart pounded wildly, and my mind raced in every direction, seeking an escape that didn't exist. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine, and that same electric jolt coursed through me, igniting a spark I had tried so hard to extinguish. "And if I can't stop loving you like this?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. His eyes searched mine, pleading for an answer I couldn't give. "What then?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt my throat tighten as tears spilled freely down my cheeks. I turned away, unable to face him or the war raging inside me. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice breaking under the weight of my anguish. "But we can't keep going like this. We'll destroy everything. Everything we've built, everything we are." The silence that followed was unbearable, a chasm filled with all the things we couldn't say. Andres didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, his pain and longing etched into his face, as if the weight of my words had crushed him. For the first time, I felt the full magnitude of what we were risking. Not just our relationship, but our very identities, the lives we had built, the people we thought we were. If you are still watching this video, and find these lessons useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. I knew then that I had to put an end to this, to summon the strength to walk away from whatever had begun to bloom between us. But even as I resolved to do so, a selfish, shameful part of me mourned the connection we had forged, the intensity of the bond that had grown in the shadows of our lives. It was a bond one had never known before, one that terrified me and yet called to me with a force I couldn't deny. As I left his room that night, I felt as though I were tearing myself in two. A part of me wanted to run back, to fall into his arms and surrender to the emotions that threatened to consume us both. But another part, the part still tethered to the person I had always been, knew I couldn't. This was a path that could only lead to ruin, and yet, as I lay awake that night, I couldn't stop the ache in my heart or the quiet, unrelenting truth that I didn't want to let him go. Over the following weeks, I poured every ounce of strength I had into rebuilding the boundaries that had crumbled between Andres and me. It was a painstaking process, one that felt like trying to piece together a fragile vase that would never be the same again. I forced myself to keep my distance, even when my heart ached for the closeness we had shared. I redirected my thoughts every time they drifted toward him, reminding myself of who I was, who we were, and what was at stake. The work was grueling, relentless, and at times it felt unbearable. But it was necessary. Each small victory, an avoided glance, a conversation kept strictly to surface-level pleasantries, felt like an exhale, a step toward reclaiming the life I had known before the storm. Little by little, the tension in the house began to ease, though the scars of what had happened lingered like invisible bruises. Andres eventually returned to university, taking with him the electric charge that had filled the air between us. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence pressing in on me like a weight. I threw myself into routines, clinging to the predictability of daily tasks like a lifeline. But no amount of distraction could erase the memories that haunted me in the quiet hours of the night. When the world was still and my thoughts were my only company, I couldn't stop myself from thinking about him, about the way his eyes had looked at me, the words we had exchanged, and the precipice we had stood on together. The story doesn't have a clean ending. Life rarely does. What I've come to understand is this: we're all flawed. We stumble, we falter, we make mistakes that leave marks on our souls. We feel things we shouldn't, wrestle with desires that defy logic, and find ourselves in places we never imagined we'd be. But at the end of the day, we have to find the strength to choose what's right, even when it breaks us. Especially when it breaks us. That's the choice I made, to step back from the edge, to turn away from what could have consumed us both, and to try to rebuild myself in the aftermath. That's what I'm doing now, piecing myself back together, brick by brick, day by day. I'm learning to live with the choices I've made, to find peace in them even when the shadows of what happened linger at the edges of my mind. Maybe someday, I'll be able to look back on this chapter without shame, without regret, only with the understanding that I'm human, and that I did the best I could with the cards I was dealt. Life moved forward, but not without its ghosts. Andres and I fell into a fragile routine of avoidance. When he came home for holidays, our conversations were polite, practiced, almost painfully formal. We were like two strangers tiptoeing around a shared secret, careful not to let it surface. The warmth that had once defined our bond was replaced by an unspoken tension, a third presence in every room we shared. And though we never spoke of it, I could feel it in every glance that lingered too long, every pause that stretched just a little too far. For months, I battled with myself, questioning every decision I had made, every emotion I had felt, every step that had led us to that precarious and forbidden place. I sought refuge in therapy, finding solace in the quiet, non-judgmental space it offered. It became my sanctuary, the one place where I could untangle the knots in my heart and mind. My therapist's words became a mantra I clung to. Emotions are uncontrollable, but actions are within your power. I repeated it to myself daily, using it as an anchor to steady myself in the storm of guilt and longing. Andres, meanwhile, seemed to find his own path forward. He threw himself into his studies with a fervor I hadn't seen before, excelling in his classes and building new friendships. From the outside, he seemed to flourish, his updates over the phone filled with stories of achievements and plans. But every now and then, in the quiet moments of our conversations, I caught glimpses of something deeper, a flicker of sadness, a vulnerability he tried to hide but couldn't completely mask. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, my phone buzzed with his name. The sound of his voice on the other end was soft, hesitant, the way it always was when he had something difficult to say. "Mom," he began, his tone carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. "I've been thinking a lot about us. About what happened." I closed my eyes, my breath catching in my throat. I wasn't ready for this conversation, though I knew it had been inevitable. "Andres," I said, my voice trembling, "we don't need to." "Please," he interrupted, his tone gentle but insistent. "Just let me say this." I fell silent, bracing myself for whatever was to come. "I was confused," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I still am, in some ways. But I've realized that what I felt wasn't just about you. It was about me. About my own struggles, my own fears, my need to hold on to something steady. And I projected that onto you, because you've always been my constant, my safe place. I think I confused admiration, love, and other feelings. But I know now that I need to work through this, for myself and for you." Tears filled my eyes as I listened, his words piercing through the silence that had grown between us. They were raw and honest, spoken with a maturity that made my heart ache. "Andres," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion, "I've been working through it too. And I'm so proud of you for facing this. It takes courage to look at yourself so honestly, to take responsibility for your feelings. For the first time in months, it felt like we had broken through the wall that had divided us." His words didn't erase the pain or the mistakes, but they offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to heal, to rebuild, to move forward. It wouldn't be easy. The scars would remain, a reminder of the path we had almost taken. But in that moment, I felt a tentative peace, knowing we were both trying to find our way back to ourselves, and to each other, in the only way we knew how. There was a long pause before he spoke, his voice trembling with sincerity. "I just want us to go back to what we were, Mom. I miss you, the real you, the one who never doubted how much she means to me as my mother. I don't want to lose that. I don't want us to lose us." His vulnerability pierced through me, breaking something fragile inside, yet healing something deeper all at once. It was a moment of clarity, a glimpse of the love we had always shared, untarnished by the confusion and mistakes we had endured. "We won't lose each other," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "But we have to take it one step at a time. We need to give ourselves space to heal." And so, we did. Healing wasn't an instant revelation or a straight path forward. It was messy, painful, and fraught with moments that tested our resolve. There were setbacks, glances that lingered a moment too long, memories that surfaced at unexpected times, pulling me back into that whirlwind of guilt and longing. But those moments became fewer, their intensity dulled by time and effort. Slowly, we started to reclaim the bond we had nearly lost. For me, therapy remained a lifeline. I confronted not only the events that had unfolded, but also the deeper loneliness and emotional voids that had left me vulnerable in the first place. It was excruciating to face the truths I had buried about myself, about the ways I had let my needs go unspoken for so long. But it was also liberating. I began to rebuild my sense of self, to understand that my worth didn't depend on external validation, and to forgive myself for being human, for feeling, for faltering, for failing, and for rising again. Andres, too, sought guidance. He found a mentor at his university, a professor who not only encouraged his academic growth, but also became a trusted confidant. Through their conversations, he began to untangle the complex emotions that had consumed him. He came to see the depth of his confusion for what it was, a manifestation of his own struggles, his fears, and his search for meaning in a time of upheaval. Little by little, he rediscovered himself, finding strength in his vulnerability and clarity in his introspection. Together, we rebuilt, not what had been lost, but something new, something grounded in understanding and mutual respect. We learned to laugh again, to share moments without the weight of unspoken truths casting shadows over us. There were still times when the past whispered at the edges of my mind, but it no longer held the power to unravel me. Now, years later, as I reflect on that chapter of our lives, the ache has softened. It hasn't disappeared entirely. I don't think it ever will, but it no longer consumes me. Andres has graduated, launched a promising career, and begun a life full of possibility and purpose. Our relationship, while different from what it once was, has grown stronger in its honesty and resilience. We are not perfect, but we are whole. The lessons of that time remain with me, etched into my soul like scars that tell a story of survival. They are a constant reminder of how easily boundaries can blur when we are unguarded, of how emotions can cloud judgment and lead us to places we never thought we'd go. But they also remind me of the power of healing, of the strength it takes to confront our darkest moments and emerge on the other side. If I've learned anything, it's this: the human heart is an intricate, messy thing. It feels deeply, sometimes irrationally, and it stumbles in its quest for connection and meaning. But it is also endlessly resilient. It can grow, adapt, and transform. It can carry us through unimaginable pain and still strive for love, not the consuming, entangling kind, but the kind that sets us free. The kind that allows us to forgive, to heal, and to move forward, carrying the lessons of our past without being defined by them. Now that you've joined us on this powerful and emotional journey, we want to hear from you. What have you learned so far from this story? What's one lesson or reflection you'll carry forward into your own life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to read your insights and experiences. And if this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Together, let's continue to explore stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the strength we all carry within.